You were not overlooked when the weight of this battle pressed harder than you thought you could hold. You were being brought to the place where what broke you open could finally stop owning you. And today is the day the pressure changes its name. There were mornings when you woke before the alarm, and your first thought was not about the day, but about the strain that had been living inside you for too long. You looked at the phone, the room, the same ceiling, the same chair, and still something in you felt unfinished, as if the air itself knew you were carrying more than you were saying. Your shoulders may have been tight before you even stood up, and your breath may have been shallow while everyone else around you seemed to move with ordinary speed. That kind of tiredness does not always come from work alone. Sometimes it comes from surviving what never found language. And when the soul has been fighting in silence, even simple things like a message, a hallway, or a cup in your hand can feel heavier than they should. You kept going, but you were not going untouched. You kept showing up, but your inner world was asking for something deeper than endurance. This is why the story matters now, because the pain in your body was never just noise. It was a signal that the old way of carrying everything was reaching its end. What is happening to you is not random, and it is not proof that you were forgotten. It is a sign that something in you has been under preparation, even while you felt delayed, corrected, or quietly set apart. By the end of this speaking, you will recognize why certain doors stayed closed, why certain conversations lost their sweetness, and why some answers took longer than your patience wanted. You will see that the battle was not only against pressure, but against the old identity that kept trying to name you by exhaustion. You will also see that peace was not absent, only buried under noise that could not stay forever. There are moments when the soul learns more from waiting than from winning quickly, and this may be one of them. The answer is not to force the door, but to notice who is standing with you while it remains shut. The answer is not to panic, but to listen for what has been returning in the middle of the silence. And when you do, attention, you need to prepare now. I put together an exclusive resource for those who feel set apart for something greater, but live surrounded by noise, distractions, and mental overload. This is a 30-day journey that will transform your life. A guided path to armor your mind and prepare for what's coming with daily practices of focus, boundaries, and discipline. Stop negotiating with the noise. Learn to spot distractions before they control you, and strengthen your mind. Also available in an immersive audio version. Over 10 Zuru readers have already transformed their lives through the 30-day journey. Thousands of people have already started this transformation. People like you who are tired of living in the fog. Ordinary people who decided to stop accepting mental chaos. Take advantage of this limited time offer only this month. Access your link just below in the pinned comment. The meaning of this day begins to rise like light under a door. You may have noticed how ordinary moments started carrying unusual weight, as if the same kitchen, the same chair, or the same drive home had become a place where your heart could no longer pretend. You washed a dish, closed a drawer, sat in the car before going inside, and something in that small pause felt louder than a full conversation. The body often knows first when a season is ending, and it speaks in ways the mind tries to minimize. Your chest tightened before words arrived. Your hands slowed before a reply, and your spirit grew quieter around things that once felt normal. That is not weakness. It is the beginning of discernment becoming stronger than habit. What once fit no longer fits, and what once soothed no longer soothes in the same way. This is how the inner life starts telling the truth before the mouth is ready. The old atmosphere cannot keep you forever when your peace has already begun to move. The one listening to this is not ordinary in the way people mean that word. You are more sensitive to pressure, more aware of tone, more disturbed by what others can ignore, and that sensitivity has often made you feel exposed instead of chosen. You have learned to read a room before trusting it, to measure a voice before answering it, and to carry responsibility that was never fully named. That is why this battle felt so intense. It was striking the very place where your discernment lives. You were not created to survive only by shrinking, and yet for a long time, shrinking may have felt like the safest form of peace. The cost of that survival was quiet exhaustion, and the cost of that exhaustion was the temptation to doubt what you already knew. But the soul that notices more is not cursed. It is being trained to recognize what cannot stay. There is a dignity in your alertness, and there is also a burden in it. Today that burden begins to loosen, not because the world has changed first, but because you have stopped mistaking numbness for safety. One opposition kept pressing against you with surprising consistency, and it did not always look hostile. Sometimes it arrived as distraction, sometimes as pressure to answer too quickly, sometimes as the feeling that you had to explain yourself one more time to be understood. It could sound like wisdom while pulling you away from prayer, or sound like urgency while stealing your peace. The old rhythm wanted you to return to what drained you simply because it was familiar. It wanted your attention scattered so your clarity would feel impossible to trust. You may have called it stress, but beneath stress there was strategy. When peace begins to return, confusion often raises its voice one last time. That is why this has not been a simple hard season, but a refining one. The noise was never stronger than your calling. It only tried to talk while you were learning to hear more clearly. There is a biblical pattern hidden in this moment, and it is not distant from your life at all. Joseph was not forgotten in the pit or in the waiting, even when his circumstances looked like delay without explanation. What looked like interruption was actually preservation, and what looked like being buried was actually being kept alive for the right hour. In your own way, you have also been living inside a kind of hidden corridor where the story was still being written out of sight. The people around you may have seen only the unfinished part, but heaven was not confused by the timing. There are seasons when the promise looks smaller before it looks fulfilled, and the heart has to learn not to measure truth by visibility alone. Your situation may have felt sealed, but sealed is not the same as destroyed. Sometimes the seal is what keeps the word safe until it can be read correctly. If you had kept pretending nothing was happening, the cycle would have kept charging interest against your peace. You would have kept calling exhaustion normal, kept calling heaviness personality, and kept calling delay the final word. But the soul pays for denial in a quiet way, and the payment is usually more confusion, more noise, more fatigue, more of the same unanswered ache. That is why this moment is serious without being cruel. It is serious because your sensitivity has been telling the truth for a long time. It is merciful because truth arrived before the pattern hardened completely. The danger was never that you felt too much. The danger was that you might start believing the numbness was safer. What you ignore does not disappear, it just asks to be carried longer. And you were never meant to carry this forever. If even one of these signs landed in you, if your shoulders dropped, if your breathing changed, if a memory or a sentence kept returning while I was speaking, write 888 in the comments. That is not a number for display, it is a quiet sign that you recognize the overflow beginning to show itself. Type 888, then come back to me. Something in you already knows that the pattern is shifting, and naming it helps you stop arguing with what your spirit has been seeing. The smallest agreement can be the first honest step out of confusion, and once you make that step, the story moves from observation into recognition. The signs were never random, and they were never meant to shame you. They were bringing you back into attention. What was happening was deeper than events, because the real struggle had moved into the places where you learned to stay small. You had trained yourself to keep peace by becoming easy to overlook, to make yourself manageable, so no one would accuse you of being difficult. That strategy may have protected you once, but protection can become a prison when a season has ended. Now the old role is losing authority, and that loss can feel like fear before it feels like freedom. You may notice it when a conversation no longer lands the same way, or when a demand that used to move you now feels strangely thin. The root is not that you have become cold. The root is that you are becoming clear. Clarity always threatens a false peace before it restores a real one. This is the door you have been standing near, and it is beginning to answer you. The battle in your mind, body, and spirit has not been a single voice, and that is why it has felt so exhausting. Your mind tried to explain everything, your body tried to warn you, and your spirit kept returning to the same quiet, knowing that something old was ending. The tension can make a person second-guess themselves, especially when others around them still sound certain. Yet certainty is not the same as truth, and loudness is not the same as wisdom. You may have wondered whether you were overreacting, but your body kept saying no before your mouth found language. The throat tightened, the sleep broke, the shoulders carried the day into the night. Those details matter because the inner world does not invent them for drama. They are often the place where discernment first becomes visible. Some environments do not hate your growth, but they resist it because they were built around your silence. Some conversations are easier when you stay available, but not fully truthful. Some people prefer the version of you that never changes, never asks, never leaves room for your own becoming. That is where the strain becomes relational, not just personal. You are not being called to suspicion, but to discernment that does not apologize for seeing clearly. The room that once felt normal may now feel crowded with expectations that do not belong to you anymore. That does not mean everyone is an enemy. It means every space is not yours to keep shrinking inside. The wrong environment will always ask for your peace as the price of admission. But the season that is ending no longer deserves that payment. The opposition used delay as one of its favorite tools, because delay can make a person question everything they know. It can make obedience look foolish and patience feel like failure. It can make you search for answers in places that only feed confusion. Yet delay is not always denial, and silence is not always absence. Sometimes the pressure is trying to hurry you away from the very place where clarity is forming. It fills the day with lesser urgencies, so you do not notice the deeper invitation standing at the edge of your attention. It tells you to answer now, fix now, explain now, prove now. But the soul that keeps rushing often misses the moment when the door quietly opens. You have not been abandoned inside that delay. You have been taught how to wait without losing yourself. And there came a point when you could no longer keep negotiating with what had already been shown to you. The inner resistance got tired, and your spirit began to recognize that continuing the same way would only extend the ache. That is the place where surrender begins to feel less like loss and more like relief. You stopped trying to make every closed thing obey your timetable. You stopped asking every wound to justify itself before healing could begin. You began to notice that some answers had already changed, even if your emotions were still catching up. This is the threshold where a person starts standing differently, not louder, just less willing to betray what is true. The image that has been forming all along is a sealed scroll resting in a quiet room. It was written before the right hour, kept safe before the hand that could open it arrived, and carried through a season where everyone could see its shape, but not yet its words. You may have felt like that scroll at times, marked by purpose but unavailable to casual reading. The covering was not punishment, it was preservation. The seal did not mean rejection, it meant timing. There were things inside you that could not be handled by a careless season, and so they remained folded until the moment of readiness. Even now that image explains why you were protected by what looked like delay. The scroll was not empty, and neither were you. What was hidden was never lost. This is where the story reaches back into your earliest formation, because the seal was not placed on you yesterday. Long before the current battle, you learned how to keep parts of yourself guarded in order to survive misunderstanding. You may have been the one who stayed quiet to keep the peace, the one who thought before speaking, the one who carried more than was fair without asking for applause. That habit of restraint became a covering, and the covering became familiar enough to feel like identity. But a sealed thing can still be precious, and a hidden thing can still be alive. The problem was never the depth of what was in you. The problem was the season that could not read it yet, so you kept moving through life with the sense that something important was waiting just beyond the edge of sight. You were not imagining it. You were living beside your own unopened message. What tried to keep the scroll closed was not always obvious, because the force was often subtle. Fear called itself caution. Comparison called itself humility. Old duty called itself loyalty. And the pressure to stay useful called itself love. These were the hands that kept pressing down on the seal, telling you that opening it too soon would be dangerous, inconvenient, or selfish. But what was really being protected was your timing, not your silence for its own sake. The struggle was never against your value. It was against the moment your value would begin to speak for itself. That is why the tension felt so intimate. It was happening around your name, around your voice, around the weight of what you carry. A sealed scroll can survive the dark, but it does not belong to the dark. Now the edge of the seal is starting to lift, and that change is not loud, but it is unmistakable. You may notice it in the way your chest loosens when truth lands, or in the way a sentence you once avoided finally feels possible to say. The paper of old fear is no longer holding the same authority. The room has not become perfect, but something in it has become honest. The scroll begins to breathe, as if the word inside it has waited patiently for this exact hour. You are not forcing the opening, you are recognizing it. That matters because forced openings often create more fear, but true openings restore peace. What was sealed is being readied, and what was hidden is becoming legible again. The movement is small, but it is real. If that image of the sealed scroll landing in you feels exact, write "Esto desperto" in the comments. Not as a performance, but as a recognition that the opening has begun inside your own attention. Type "Esto desperto", then come back to me. This is what it means. When the hidden thing starts moving, you stop sleeping through the language of your own life. You start noticing what was always there. You start honoring the timing that kept you safe before you were ready to read. And from that place, the return becomes less about striving and more about alignment. The next step is not to rush the scroll. It is to keep your hands steady as the words begin to show. Returning now does not mean pretending the wound never hurt or the waiting was easy. It means you finally see that what covered you was not the same thing as what defined you. The seal protected the word, and the word protected the future. In practical terms, this is where you begin to live differently in the ordinary hours. In the morning, you can set one quiet sentence before the day begins and refuse to let urgency name you first. In the evening, you can pause before answering from pressure and ask whether the response belongs to peace or to fear. Those small acts are not magic. They are stewardship. They help you stay near the truth that has been returning. And the more you live that way, the less the old noise can dictate your pace. One practice is to begin the day with a quiet threshold pause, even if it is only a few breaths at the edge of the bed. Let your hand rest still before it reaches for the phone, and let your body remember that not every demand deserves immediate surrender. This small pause can become a place where peace speaks before performance does. You may still enter a hard day, but you will enter it more anchored. The difference is not dramatic to the eye, yet the soul feels it deeply. The old pattern wants instant reaction. The new pattern begins with listening, and listening changes the shape of the day before the day has a chance to shape you. Another practice is a peace audit, simple and honest, where you notice what expands you and what drains you without apologizing for the difference. You can do it in a room, in a conversation, or after a message that left your spirit heavy. If something consistently shrinks you, it is telling you something important. If something brings a quiet steadiness, it is also telling you something important. This is not about cutting every person off or living in suspicion. It is about learning to recognize where your peace is being invited and where it is being spent. Discernment becomes trustworthy when it is practiced in ordinary places. That is how the sealed scroll learns to live in the open without losing itself. Protection is often quieter than people expect. It can look like a delay that keeps you from answering too soon. It can look like a closed door that prevents a return to what would have drained you again. It can look like a conversation ending before you were pulled back into an old role. What felt like rejection may have been separation, and what felt like loss may have been mercy in a form you did not recognize at first. This is not a promise that everything will become easy. It is a reminder that not every no is abandonment. Some boundaries are a kindness you only understand after the fact. The scroll is kept safe by limits before it is carried into public light. So now your task is not striving, but stewardship of what has returned to awareness. You do not need to announce everything, prove everything, or explain every change to people who only understand the old version of you. You need only honor the quiet shift that has already begun. There is strength in refusing to shrink for the comfort of a room that cannot hold your full truth. There is wisdom in stopping the conversation that feeds confusion. There is peace in allowing your yes to mean yes and your no to guard what matters. The battle ended when you stopped calling a draining cycle your home. That is not loss, that is release. If something in this message confirmed what your spirit already knew, let your like be your amen without words. Not as a metric, but as an agreement that what was named here was named correctly. Then return to the quiet knowing that has been forming in you all along. There is a kind of consent that happens before language finishes catching up, and this is one of those moments. What was hidden is not mocked when it is acknowledged. What was sealed is not diminished when it is honored. And what is being restored in you does not need applause to be real. It only needs your honest yes. There is someone in your life who needs this exact message tonight. Someone quietly tired, someone secretly seeking, someone carrying a posture nobody sees. Their face came to mind for a reason, and that reason is not random. This is how care travels when one person receives a word that was never meant to stop with them. Send this to them, not as a recommendation, but as a delivery. Let it reach the one who has been standing in their own silent room, wondering whether anything has changed. Sometimes the most loving thing is to place the right word in the right hands at the right time. And you already know who that is. That knowing is part of the assignment. Before this closes, write "Heu so de Deus" in the comments. Not as a wish and not as a performance, but as confirmation that the battle did not rename you. Type it slowly and let your fingers agree with what your spirit has been learning. This declaration matters because it marks the moment you stop letting the old season speak over your identity. It is not a demand for proof. It is a seal of recognition. What belongs to God does not have to beg to be seen. It stands, returns, and remains. When you look back now, you can see how the signs, the strain, the delays, and the quiet openings were all part of the same movement. The room that no longer fit you was not a mistake. The pause that humbled your pride was not empty. The silence that sharpened your hearing was not abandonment. It was the sealed scroll learning how to be read at the right hour. You were being protected from premature handling, and you were being prepared for clearer seeing. That is why the battle feels finished today, even if the path ahead still asks for faithfulness. The ending of one fight is not the disappearance of all movement. It is the end of being ruled by what once held you down. Today you are not pretending the story was easy. You are finally seeing that it was honest. You are confirmed. You are remembered. You are not late. You are not abandoned. You are being returned to what was never destroyed. You are learning to stand without shrinking, to breathe without fear, to move without begging permission from the old wound. You are learning that quiet is not emptiness when God has been speaking through it. You are learning that sealed things are not dead things. You are learning that a battle can end without spectacle and still end completely. Right now across the world, attention. You need to prepare now. I put together an exclusive resource for those who feel set apart for something greater, but live surrounded by noise, distractions, and mental overload. This is a 30-day journey that will transform your life. A guided path to armor your mind and prepare for what's coming with daily practices of focus, boundaries, and discipline. Stop negotiating with the noise. Learn to spot distractions before they control you. And strengthen your mind. Also available in an immersive audio version. Over 10 Zuzazara readers have already transformed their lives through the 30-day journey. Thousands of people have already started this transformation. People like you who are tired of living in the fog. Ordinary people who decided to stop accepting mental chaos. Take advantage of this limited time offer only this month. Access your link just below in the pinned comment.